Hello everyone. This month we're going to be talking about women's health, specifically the menstrual cycle. We all know the menstrual cycle supports a woman's fertility and reproductive function. It begins at the onset of the first period, called the menarche, and it ends 1 year after the last period. In between, we have different phases. We have premenopause, which we can consider our reproductive years. Perimenopause, which is the onset of all the symptoms, all the changes in our hormones that are happening in our body. Menopause, which is the 1 day after the 1 year of no period, and then postmenopause. On this picture, you're going to find everything that is happening during our cycle. It is divided in two different phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. The follicular phase is considered the low hormone phase, and it's from day 1 through 14th on average. Day 1 will be considered the day when we have our periods, when we shed that lining of the uterus. That's where it's depicted with that red dome. And day 14 is when we have that ovulation, right in the middle. Around ovulation is when you're going to start seeing a little bit of a peak of the hormones, estrogen and FSH. On the second part of our cycle is the luteal phase. This is considered the high hormone phase, when progesterone increases to get the uterus ready to implant that egg that is going to be fertilized and therefore become an embryo. Now, let's go ahead and talk about how to train, how to unlock the power of our menstrual cycle and make it work to our advantage. As mentioned before, the cycle is divided into phases. The follicular phase and the luteal phase. Let's talk about the follicular phase first. The follicular phase is the low hormone phase. This is when you want to focus on high intensity and low volume. On the first part of the follicular phase is when you want to do heavy resistance training and you're the most resilient to pain and injury. On the second part of that follicular phase, days about 8 through 14, is when you want to train for peak power. Go to the max, test those PRs, and test those neuromuscular gains. Fueling wise, you want to concentrate on eating more carbs to fuel you for those heavy training sessions, but you also want to make sure that you start establishing that sleep consistency. Reflection and regulation is always necessary. Meditating, journaling, visualizing your goals is very important. Practice your breath work, stretching, some yoga. It is also beneficial. But it's during the luteal phase when you want to focus on the low intensity. This is when your high hormone phase is at its peak. So going high volume, low intensity, it's better. On the first part of the luteal phase, you just want to maintain that strength that you build during the first part of it. Begin to dial down the intensity and be mindful of the bloating and fatigue. On the last portion of the luteal phase, that's when you reduce intensity and focus on just recovery, stability, technique, be more flexible with energy levels and the changes that are happening. You want to increase your protein intake and, of course, emphasize that sleep consistency that you created during the first part of your cycle. And as always, reflection and regulation is important, so continue with your meditations, journaling, visualizing your goals, practicing your breath work, etc. Let's talk about how to train on each decade of your life. When you're a teenager, you're building the base. All those skills that you learned when you were a kid, running, jumping, lifting, throwing, are coming in handy for your sports activities. When you're on your 20s, peak performance potential builds up. just when you want to maximize muscle, bone, and cardiovascular gains. Think about all those HIIT classes, spinning, Camp Gladiator, F45, etc. During your 30s, you want to focus on strength, maintenance, and life balance because you're a responsible adult now. When you enter your 40s, this is when normally perimenopause begins. And you want to focus on lifting heavy and often. Think about compound lifts. HIIT training and cardio, short, intense workouts boost growth hormone and metabolic health. But you want to make sure that you focus on strength training. When you enter your 50s, it's menopause and beyond. Resistance training is a non-negotiable and should be the main focus of your training. Continuing with HIIT training twice a week and adding some plyometrics is also a good idea. Once you enter your 60s, functional strength and independence kicks in. So continue doing your heavy resistance training. That should be a must for bone preservation and muscle preservation. Last but not least, we have a 4-week training plan for our premenopausal woman. We're dividing this in 4 weeks, where the first 2 weeks is when you enter the follicular phase. Remember, this is your low hormone phase, and you want to focus on the high intensity and heavy resistance. Focus on peak power, hitting those PRs and your muscular gains. Where the last 2 weeks is your luteal phase, your high hormone phase. And this is where you want to start dwindling down a little bit on that intensity. You want to maintain strength, begin to dial down the intensity, be more mindful of all the changes that are happening in your body with your bloating and fatigue, and focus more on recovery and stability. If you want a more detailed program, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And don't forget to share this with somebody that you love.